Hey, Holmes here, back with another story. Gigi's over there in the corner. She might jump up, but right now she's exploring, probably looking for trouble. Anyways, today's story is Alligator Baby by Robert Munsch. One night, Kristen's mother woke up and yelled, "A baby! A baby! I'm having a baby!" Kristen's father jumped up, zoomed around the room, got dressed, and grabbed Kristen's mother by the hand. They ran downstairs to the car and they drove off really fast. Unfortunately, they got lost. They didn't go to the hospital, they went to the zoo. But it was okay. Kristen's mother had a lovely baby. Then they drove home and knocked on their front door. Blam, 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 blam. Kristen opened the door, and there was her mother, holding something all wrapped up. "Kristen," she said, "would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. So Kristen lifted up the bottom of the blanket. She saw a long green tail and said, "That's not a people tail." Kristen lifted up the middle of the blanket. She saw a green claw and said, "That's not a people claw." Kristen lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a long green face with lots of teeth, and said, "That's not a people face, that's not my baby brother." "Now, Kristen," said her mother, "don't be jealous." Just then, the baby reached up and bit Kristen's mother on the nose. She yelled, "Ah!" Then the baby reached up and bit her father on the nose, and he yelled, "Ah!" "That's not a people baby," said Kristen. "That's an alligator baby." "Goodness," said her mother, "we've got the wrong baby." So Kristen put the alligator baby into the fish tank, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. They came back an hour later and knocked on the door. Blam, 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 blam. Kristen opened the door, and her mother said, "Would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. Kristen lifted up the bottom of the blanket. She saw a fishy tail and said, "That's not a people tail." Kristen lifted up the middle of the blanket. She saw a flipper and said, "That's not a people flipper." Kristen lifted up the top of the blanket. She saw a face with whiskers and said, "That's not a people face, that's not my baby brother." "Now, Kristen," her mother said, "don't be jealous." But just then, the baby reached up with its flipper and flapped her father's face. Whop, 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 whop. He yelled, "Ah! It's a seal baby! We got the wrong baby!" So Kristen put the seal baby in the bathtub, and her mother and father drove back to the zoo. They came back in an hour and knocked on the door. Blum, 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 blum. They said, "Kristen, would you like to see your new baby brother?" "Oh, yes," said Kristen. She lifted up the bottom of the blanket and saw a very hairy leg and said, "That's not a people leg." Then she lifted up the middle of the blanket and saw a very hairy arm and said, "That's not a people arm." Then she lifted up the top of the blanket, saw a very hairy face and said, "That's not a people face, that's not my baby brother." "Now, Kristen," her mother said, "don't be jealous." Then the baby reached up with its feet and grabbed her mother's ear and her father's ear, and they both yelled, "Ah!" "It's a gorilla baby! We've got the wrong baby!" "Let me do it," said Kristen. So her mother and father put the gorilla baby on the chandelier in the living room, and Kristen went off to the zoo on her bicycle. First, Kristen looked in the snake cage. No people babies. Then Kristen looked in the wombat cage. No people babies. Then Kristen looked in the elephant cage. No people babies. Then she stopped and listened. From far away, she heard, "Wah, wah, wah." "Now that's more like it," said Kristen. She followed the sound. It was coming from the gorilla cage. Kristen looked at the mummy gorilla and said, "Give me my baby brother." The gorilla jumped away and wouldn't give the baby back at all. Then the people baby reached up and bit the gorilla on the nose, and the gorilla yells, "Arr!" and handed the baby to Kristen. Kristen jumped on her bicycle and pedaled home. Kristen knocked on the door. Blum blum, oh, blum 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 blum. When her parents opened it up, she said, "Would you like to see your new baby?" Kristen's mother lifted up the bottom of the blanket and she said, "Look! People legs!" Then she lifted up the middle of the blanket and said, "Look! People hands!" Then she lifted up the top of the blanket and said, "Look! A people face!" My voice is going. Kristen's mother picked up the baby and gave it a big hug. Her father took the baby and gave it a big hug too. Then her mother said, "Kristen, Kristen, you got the baby back! Good for you!" "But what are we going to do with all these other babies?" yelled Crystal's father. "There's a seal baby in the bathtub, there's an alligator baby in the fish tank, and no more it doesn't say that. And a gorilla baby hanging from the chandelier. We should take them back to the zoo." But Kristen looked out the window and said, "I don't think we have to do anything at all." Know what? This story is just a lot of fun. Obviously, thank you very much for watching. Please support the book. It helps everyone out when you do. If you enjoy the video, consider giving it a like. It helps me out. And if you'd like to see more, consider subscribing. It helps us both. And if you have any questions, have any comments, or have any suggestions for other books you might like to see, feel free to leave it in the comments. I do read them, I promise. And with that, I'm Holmes, and bye-bye!